Every country wants a success story it can point to and say, this is what the future looks like. For India, that story had a name. A teacher with a whiteboard, a startup that promised to democratize education, a unicorn that became a decacorn. Parents trusted it. Students believed in it. Investors poured billions into it. But somewhere between vision and valuation, something changed. This is the corporate file on Byju's and how unchecked ambition quietly turned into scandal. The origin story that built trust. Byju's didn't start as a corporation. It started as a classroom. A charismatic teacher simplifying complex concepts. Learning made engaging, education without fear. That authenticity mattered. Parents didn't see a company. They saw a mentor. Byju Ravandran wasn't just another entrepreneur. He was an engineer who discovered he had a gift for teaching. Students who struggled with math and science suddenly understood when he explained it. His methods worked. His passion was real. When the app launched, it carried that same promise. Learn better, learn faster, learn without pressure. And in a country obsessed with education, where entrance exams determine futures and parental anxiety runs deep, that promise was priceless. The early product reflected genuine care. Content was thoughtfully designed. Concepts were broken down visually. Students actually enjoyed learning. This wasn't just marketing, it was mission-driven work. Trust came first, money followed later. And that trust would become the foundation for everything that came next, both the rise and the fall. When growth became the mission, success arrived fast, too fast. Valuations exploded. Global investors lined up. Media crowned it India's most valuable edtech startup. By 2021, Byju's was valued at over $22 billion. It had backing from some of the world's most prestigious investors. It was acquiring companies, expanding globally, signing celebrity endorsements. But here's the problem with hypergrowth. It doesn't reward caution. It rewards expansion. Targets weren't academic anymore. They were financial. Sales teams multiplied. Aggressive deadlines replaced thoughtful onboarding. The company hired thousands, many with sales backgrounds, but limited educational expertise. The focus shifted from how do we help students learn to how do we hit this quarter's numbers. Education slowly became a product, not a purpose. Inside the company, former employees would later describe a culture transformation. What started as a mission-driven organization began operating like a high-pressure sales machine. The marketing still spoke about learning outcomes, but internally, conversations centered on conversion rates, revenue targets, and growth metrics. And once growth becomes the mission, ethics become negotiable. Because growth demands scale, scale demands speed, and speed eliminates the pauses where questions get asked. The sales machine. Former employees later described a culture of pressure. Sales calls that didn't feel optional. Emotional pitches aimed at anxious parents. Promises of guaranteed success, sometimes overstated, sometimes unrealistic. Parents reported receiving persistent calls. Some alleged high-pressure tactics. Others described being convinced to take loans for courses costing hundreds of thousands of rupees. The pitch was compelling. Your child's future depends on this. Competitive exams are brutal. This investment will change everything, and for parents already anxious about their children's education, that message was powerful. Refunds complicated, cancellations delayed. In some cases, parents alleged they didn't fully understand the financial commitments they were signing up for. Loan agreements with third-party lenders, multi-year subscriptions, terms buried in lengthy contracts. Consumer complaints began surfacing online. Stories of families struggling to cancel subscriptions, of money deducted despite requests to stop, of customer service that suddenly became unreachable. The brand still spoke the language of education, of empowerment, of helping every child succeed. But internally, it was operating like a high-stakes sales engine. And engines don't slow down on their own. Revenue targets justified the methods. After all, the company was growing. Students were enrolling, investors were happy, until they weren't. Acquisitions and distraction. As criticism grew, expansion continued. Byju's began acquiring other companies at a rapid pace, domestically and internationally. A coding platform for kids, a test prep company, an international tutoring service. Over a dozen acquisitions in just a few years. On paper, it looked like dominance. A comprehensive education ecosystem, global ambition, strategic vision. In reality, it created complexity. Different systems, different cultures, different financial realities. Integrating acquisitions is difficult even for well-managed companies. For a company growing this fast, it became nearly impossible. Former employees from acquired companies described confusion, promised autonomy that disappeared, resources that never materialized, strategic direction that kept shifting. Managing learning outcomes became harder. Managing cash flow became critical. And when questions started emerging about delayed payments to vendors, layoffs without notice, and internal financial controls, the response wasn't clarity. It was silence. Reports surfaced of unpaid dues to suppliers, of acquired companies struggling to access promised funding, of integration plans that existed on paper but not in practice. The vision was expanding faster than the operational capacity to deliver it. And in that gap, problems multiplied quietly. When transparency breaks, one of the biggest red flags in any corporation is delayed disclosure. Financial reports were postponed, then postponed again. Auditors exited. Not just one, but multiple auditing firms resigned or were replaced. Regulatory scrutiny increased. Questions about financial practices, concerns about governance, investigations into sales tactics. For investors, transparency is oxygen. Without it, confidence suffocates. What made this worse was contrast. This was a company built on trust, teaching children values like discipline and honesty, while struggling to communicate clearly with stakeholders. Board meetings reportedly became contentious. Investors demanded answers. Founders defended decisions. The gap between expectations and reality widened. Financial statements that should have been routine became sources of conflict. Why the delays? What were they hiding? Or were they simply overwhelmed? The lack of clear communication created speculation, and speculation, in the absence of facts, becomes narrative. That contradiction is where reputations collapse, not with one scandal, but with many unanswered questions. Consumer complaints continued. Regulatory investigations expanded. Media coverage shifted from celebration to skepticism. And through it all, the company maintained that it was committed to its mission, that challenges were normal for a fast-growing startup, that critics didn't understand the vision. But when the numbers don't arrive and the auditors walk away, vision stops mattering. Power without pause. Byju'S had something rare. Cultural goodwill, political visibility, global capital. That combination creates insulation. When problems surfaced, they didn't immediately lead to accountability. They led to restructuring, rebranding, internal reshuffling. Executives departed, new leadership arrived, strategies pivoted. This is how corporate power protects itself. Not by denying failure, but by outlasting outrage. The company announced layoffs, then walked them back. Announced new funding, then faced questions about valuations. Promised transparency, then delayed filings again. Each crisis was managed, contained, or redirected. Because when you're valued in the billions, when you employ thousands, when you're positioned as a national success story, consequences look different. Regulators moved cautiously. Investors negotiated privately. Media coverage was critical but not fatal. Time becomes the strategy. Survive long enough and attention moves elsewhere. But time also accumulates damage. Employee morale suffers. Brand trust erodes. Partners grow cautious. And eventually the insulation wears thin. By 2023, the narrative had completely shifted. From India's edtech darling to a cautionary tale about startup excess. From visionary founder to embattled CEO. From $22 billion valuation to desperate fundraising. Power had protected the company from immediate collapse, but it couldn't protect it from reality. The real cost of the fall. This story isn't about celebrating a collapse, it's about understanding one. Byju'S didn't fail because education is flawed. It stumbled because ambition outpaced ethics. When growth becomes identity, when valuation becomes validation, and when power stops listening, even the best ideas can rot from the inside. The real victims aren't investors who can absorb losses. They're families who took on debt believing in a promise. Students who deserved better than aggressive sales tactics. Employees who joined believing in a mission, only to find themselves in a corporate machine. The lesson here isn't just for startups, it's for parents, for investors, for regulators. Because corporate corruption doesn't always start with greed. Sometimes it starts with applause. Applause that becomes pressure. Pressure that becomes targets. Targets that become justification for cutting corners. Byju'S started with a teacher who genuinely cared about helping students understand difficult concepts. That origin story was real. But somewhere in the journey from classroom to unicorn, the mission got buried under the metrics. And once that happens, once the numbers matter more than the purpose, decline becomes inevitable. The question isn't whether Byju's will recover. The question is what we learn from watching it fall. Do we build better guardrails for hypergrowth companies? Do we demand transparency earlier? Do we question valuations that seem detached from fundamentals? Or do we wait for the next visionary founder, the next promising startup, the next story we want to believe in, and repeat the same cycle? Because right now, somewhere, another company is facing the same choice Byju's faced. Between sustainable growth and explosive expansion. Between mission and metrics. Between serving customers and satisfying investors. And the decisions being made in those boardrooms today will determine whether we're writing another case file tomorrow. This was World Corporate Files. And this case file remains open. When ambition stops asking questions, power fills the silence. If this investigation revealed patterns you recognize, subscribe to World Corporate Files. Because the next case is already unfolding, and the warning signs are already there.